imagine being, well, just 8 years old.
Right.
You've been pulled out of your regular school environment, and you are currently enrolled in a highly rigid, heavily monitored 8-week clinical outpatient feeding program.
Which is incredibly intense for a kid.
Exactly. You are at the Kennedy Krieger Institute, which is this major medical facility in Baltimore. And your daily routine is totally dictated by doctors, behavioral therapists, and strict clinical protocols.
Because they're trying to intervene in an eating disorder.
Right, an eating disorder that has dominated your life for the past 5 years. Every single bite you take is scrutinized.
Yeah, your entire world is just clinical, controlled, and deeply stressful.
So hold that image in your head. Now, imagine that just 1 calendar year later, at age 9, you look around your life and you definitively declare it to be the absolute peak of your existence.
It's wild.
You call it the start of the best years of your life.
It's just a profound psychological pivot,
Yeah, it really is.
Going from the absolute apex of clinical restriction to the apex of childhood joy in the span of, 12 months? It's not just a change of scenery.
No, not at all.
It requires a fundamental rewiring of a child's internal landscape.
And that rewiring is exactly what we're going to unpack today. So welcome back to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Glad to be here as always.
For those of you listening, you are already intimately familiar with the end result of the life we are discussing today. We have spent previous deep dives exploring Dominic.
We've talked extensively about Verse World.
Right. His incredibly expansive, intricate science fiction world-building project.
We've marveled at the lore, the mechanics, the sheer scale of the universe he built from scratch.
And we've also talked at length about the dramatic, very recent falling out he had with his biological father.
An event that literally just happened in 2026.
Yeah, so we know the destination, right? We know the complex, brilliant, and sometimes, fractured place where Dominic has arrived today.
But the source material we are looking at for this conversation is something entirely different from a finished sci-fi manuscript.
Exactly. We are looking at what is essentially an architectural blueprint of a human psyche.
The document is titled simply Timeline of Dominic.
Yeah, and it covers his life from his birth in December 2003 all the way up to the present day in 2026.
It's not a traditional biography, though?
No, it's a highly detailed, deeply personal, chronological map. It logs every physical move, every major psychological shift, every trauma, and, every creative milestone.
So our mission today is to reverse engineer Dominic's life trajectory.
Because we know that Verse World didn't just pop into existence in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
We want to understand the anatomy of how he got there.
And what's fascinating here is that timelines, by their very nature, they usually function as these sterile lists of dates.
Just objective markers like, this happened, then that happened.
Right, but when you start reading between the lines of Dominic's timeline, it ceases to be a calendar.
What does it become?
It becomes a topographical map of his coping mechanisms. We can trace, with remarkable clarity, how art, access to technology, and shifting physical environments operated as the ultimate stabilizers.
Stabilizers in a life that was, frankly, highly unstable from the very beginning.
Exactly. This document records the evolution of a mind desperately trying to build a safe container for itself.
Okay, let's track that search for a container back to its absolute origin point.
Right back to the beginning.
We are starting in December 2003 in Elkton, Maryland. Dominic spends his earliest days living in a mobile home in Woodlawn Estates, which is in Port Deposit.
And almost immediately, the timeline hits us with this very specific, striking image.
Yeah, an entry for April 2004. Dominic is essentially 0 years old. Maybe 4 or 5 months old at best.
And he creates what he considers his first piece of art.
He describes it as a painting of colorful smears and 2 yellow footprints.
And he explicitly notes right there in the document that he would continue to create art for the next 22 years.
Anchoring an entire creative lineage to a pair of baby footprints is quite a statement.
It really is. From a developmental perspective, an infant making marks on paper, even if guided by an adult, is the earliest introduction to the concept of cause and effect in the physical world.
Like, I move my foot, a color appears.
Exactly. I exist, and I can leave a trace. For Dominic to retroactively view this as the inception of a 2-decade artistic journey suggests that art has always been his primary method of proving his own existence.
But the innocence of those yellow footprints is, it's almost immediately overshadowed.
Yeah, things change fast.
By 2007, when Dominic is just 3 years old, 2 monumental things happen simultaneously. First, he notes that his earliest memory forms.
He mentions it is one of only 3 memories he retains from this entire early period.
Right. And second, and this is the detail that really gives you pause, an eating disorder becomes evident.
At 3 years old.
Yeah. We also see that right around this time, they move from the mobile home to an apartment in Rising Sun, Maryland. So we have an eating disorder presenting in a literal toddler.
Which requires us to look really closely at the clinical realities of early childhood psychology.
Because when we hear the term eating disorder, society has kind of trained us to picture adolescence, right?
Exactly. We think of teenagers grappling with societal pressures, media influence, or complex body image dysmorphia.
But a 3-year-old, that's a completely different mechanism.
Yeah, at that age, it is almost entirely rooted in the locus of control.
Because a 3-year-old essentially has 0 agency.
None whatsoever. A toddler cannot choose where they live. They cannot dictate the financial stability of their household.
Right, they can't choose who enters or exits their family dynamic, or when they pack up and move from a mobile home to an apartment.
The only physical boundary a 3-year-old can absolutely enforce is their own mouth.
Food becomes the sole domain of sovereignty.
Precisely. If the external environment feels chaotic, unpredictable, or unsafe, the child will often exert extreme, rigid control over what they ingest.
So it is a biological defense mechanism manifesting as a behavioral issue.
Yes, exactly.
So his physical world is already requiring these massive, rigid defenses just to survive day to day. And the contrast between that extreme restriction and the freedom of those colorful smears and footprints, it's stark.
It establishes the dichotomy that will define the rest of his life.
Which is?
The physical realm is a place of chaos that must be managed through control and restriction, while the creative realm is a place of expression and expansiveness.
And that creative realm is about to get exponentially larger.
Oh, absolutely.
As we look at the years 2008 and 2009, when Dominic is 4 and 5 years old, he discovers the digital world.
At 4, he begins using computers.
Yeah, and at 5, he plays his first video game, which was New Super Mario Bros. Wii. But the detail that completely recontextualized this entire timeline for me happens in late 2009.
This is a major turning point.
At 5 years old, Dominic begins browsing DeviantArt.
Right, and we really need to contextualize what the internet, and specifically DeviantArt, was in 2009.
Because we are not talking about the highly curated, algorithmically sanitized, child-locked internet of today.
Not at all. Web 2.0 in 2009 was raw. DeviantArt was this sprawling, decentralized, entirely community-driven platform.
It was basically a chaotic global gallery where amateur artists, professionals, teenagers, and hobbyists all posted their work side by side.
And for a 5-year-old to be independently navigating that space is highly atypical.
Usually, a 5-year-old's media diet is strictly PBS Kids, Nickelodeon, or whatever DVDs are put in front of them. It is passive and heavily guarded.
But Dominic is actively seeking out a specific aesthetic community. He is learning the visual language of independent artists from across the globe.
He is clicking through galleries, seeing digital paintings, character designs, world-building concepts, fan art.
He is absorbing the idea that you can create an alternate reality, render it visually, and share it with a community that will validate it.
This isn't just a child playing a Mario game and putting the controller down.
No, this is the foundational pouring of concrete for his future digital sanctuary.
I just picture, like, a toddler wandering away from their parents in a museum, finding a back door, and suddenly stepping into an infinite global art commune where there are no rules and no adult supervision.
It's a great analogy. He is just soaking in pure, unfiltered imagination.
But here's where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a correlating event on the timeline right next to this.
Right.
Around this exact same time, at age 5, he stops attending the Church of the Nazarene in Colorado, Maryland, and he also begins kindergarten.
2 big shifts in his physical routine.
Yeah, so here's a theory I want to run by you. We have a child dealing with early environmental stress, moving homes, struggling with a need for control.
Yes.
Suddenly, his physical world-structured community, the church, is removed from his routine. Almost instantaneously, he replaces it with video games and internet art forums.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Is it possible that stopping church at age 5 and instantly replacing it with internet art forums created an early religion of escapism for him?
Well, if we break down the fundamental sociological functions of a religion, the parallel is incredibly strong.
Right. because a religion offers a cosmology.
Exactly. A way to understand how the universe works. It offers a set of rules, a community of like-minded individuals, a hierarchy of values, and a sense of belonging to something larger than your immediate physical surroundings.
So when you are 5 years old and your physical environment is defined by lack of control and your traditional religious structure vanishes,
Stepping into DeviantArt must have felt like stepping into a cathedral.
it provides an entirely new cosmology.
Yes. It provides a cosmology where the physical circumstances of your birth are irrelevant.
Because the internet in 2009 did not care if you lived in a mobile home or an apartment.
It did not care about your family dynamics or your eating disorder. The digital community only judges you on your imagination and your output.
So it functioned as a proto-religion.
Definitely. It was the first time Dominic was exposed to the concept of an alternative reality, a reality where the rules were dictated by creativity rather than physical limitations,
It was his first glimpse of a world he might one day be able to control.
which is incredibly empowering for a kid in his situation.
But this early fragile piece, this digital curiosity he is cultivating it, directly collides with a period of intense medical and familial transition just a few years later.
We arrive at the years 2012 and 2013 when Dominic is 8 and 9 years old.
And this is where we encounter the massive psychological paradox I mentioned at the very beginning of the show.
Right, because the timeline of these 2 years defies standard logical progression if you are only looking at the surface events.
Okay, so let's lay out the data points for the listeners. Early 2012, Dominic is 8. He is pulled out of his regular school environment early.
And he is enrolled in that 8-week outpatient feeding program at the Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore.
He continues his schooling while he is there. But make no mistake, this is a serious medical intervention. Kennedy Krieger is a highly respected, intensive clinical facility.
This intervention is designed to address the eating disorder that had been his primary coping mechanism since he was 3.
So we have to imagine the day-to-day reality of an 8-week feeding program for an 8-year-old child.
It is the antithesis of freedom.
It's highly monitored, interdisciplinary. He's working with behavioral psychologists, pediatricians, dietitians.
The protocol often involves scheduled eating, strict observation, and behavioral interventions designed to break deeply ingrained habits.
The entire focus of his day is built around dismantling a psychological and physical defense mechanism he has relied on for 5 years.
The level of scrutiny and pressure is immense. The control he exerted over his own body is being systematically challenged and redirected by medical professionals.
It sounds incredibly exhausting. But then, we look at what happens immediately after this grueling program.
Things shift very quickly.
In mid-2012, he gets his first video game console, a Nintendo DS, along with the game SpongeBob's Atlantis SquarePantis.
A huge deal for a kid.
And a new figure enters his life. The timeline notes this as the beginning of the Bruce era, Bruce being his mother's fiancé.
Right.
On July 1st, 2012, they moved to a physical house in Elk Mills, Maryland. And then we turn the page to 2013, age 9.
And Dominic explicitly writes in his timeline that 2013 was the, quote, peak of quality of life and the, quote, start of the best years of my life.
He makes a point to include a parenthesis clarifying that this happiness was unrelated to the Bruce era.
There's also a mysterious redacted event here, just black boxes in the text. But the overarching, undeniable theme is pure joy.
So what does this all mean for his memory of this time? How does a child go through an intensive medical intervention that strips away their primary coping mechanism and then immediately declare the following year to be the absolute apex of their life?
It's a great question. We typically expect early childhood trauma and intense clinical interventions to leave a lingering shadow, to create a period of adjustment or residual anxiety.
Right, it feels like there should be a refractory period, but instead there's this immediate euphoria. How do those two extremes coexist?
We have to view this through the psychological principle of contrast. Human beings do not evaluate their happiness in a vacuum. We evaluate it relative to our previous baseline.
And Dominic's baseline, from age 3 to age 8, was defined by the rigid restriction of his eating disorder, living in apartments, and culminating in the intense clinical gaze of the Kennedy Krieger Institute.
He was living in a state of high psychological and physical compression.
Like a coiled spring.
Precisely. When you live in a state of extreme restriction, whether self-imposed through a disorder or externally imposed by a clinic, any release from that pressure feels monumental.
So after the structure of the Institute, moving to a physical house in Elk Mills likely provided an unprecedented sense of autonomy and stability.
Yes. A house offers different physical boundaries than an apartment or a mobile home. It often implies permanence, a yard, a distinct personal space.
And then consider the Nintendo DS.
Right. His first real piece of hardware.
It is pure, unadulterated autonomy in the palm of his hands.
Exactly. A Nintendo DS is a private screen. You can close it, you can take it into your room, you dictate the actions of the characters.
He finally had a device he could control the outcome of, providing a private digital retreat that belonged solely to him.
The contrast between the clinical environment where adults controlled every bite he took and the freedom of the Elk Mills house where he could control his digital avatar created an incredible sense of stability.
The joy of 2013 wasn't just about things being good. It was the sheer relief of things being profoundly better than the compression that preceded them.
It's all relative.
I think about how environments dictate our memories. Let's look at the Bruce era in the Elk Mills house. The timeline is very careful to state that the peak quality of life was unrelated to Bruce.
Right. He makes sure to point that out.
So if we think of this period as a theatrical stage set, Bruce might be the co-star on the stage, but the physical environment, the house itself, the DS, the lifting of the medical pressure, is the actual stage that allows the play to happen.
That's a very perceptive way to look at it.
That house provided a safe container. It was a physical space that finally supported his autonomy instead of restricting it, which forever cemented 2013 as his golden year.
The physical space became the sanctuary he had been looking for since he was 3. But, if we connect this to the bigger picture, golden ages in childhood, especially in highly volatile family dynamics, they don't last forever.
They are fragile.
They are heavily dependent on external factors remaining stable. When those external factors shift, the sanctuary collapses.
And that collapse happens quickly.
Yeah.
We move into the period covering 2014 to 2016. Dominic goes from ages 10 to 12.
And on August 1st, 2014, the timeline bluntly states, Bruce era ends. End of the best years of my life.
They move out of the Elk Mills house and back into an apartment in Rising Sun.
The speed at which his environment destabilizes is alarming.
Yeah, because by early 2015, at age 11, the timeline notes the beginning of the Nelson era, a new fiancé.
Within a window of months, Dominic loses his ideal physical environment, loses a father figure, moves back to an apartment, and gains a new, completely different father figure.
His locus of control is entirely upended again.
Completely.
And right in the middle of this domestic upheaval, in August 2015, he starts middle school. The timeline explicitly notes that for the next 2 years of middle school, he is actively bullied by other students.
The neurological and psychological impact of middle school bullying on an 11-year-old cannot be overstated.
It's brutal.
At age 11, peer validation begins to supersede parental validation in a child's development. To enter that social arena and be actively targeted induces a state of chronic hypervigilance.
His physical world has entirely betrayed him on 2 fronts. His home life is undergoing rapid, unpredictable transitions, and his school life is actively hostile.
There is no physical safe harbor.
But there is a crucial lifeline introduced right as the bullying begins. In June 2015, just before middle school starts, he gets his first cell phone.
And this seemingly small piece of technology triggers a total explosion of digital activity in 2016 when he is 12 years old.
Yeah. After another redacted discovery in the timeline, August 2016 sees him creating a Google account and a YouTube channel.
A few days later, he makes his first Yahoo email.
In September, he starts watching and subscribes to the YouTuber Markiplier.
In late September, they move again, this time to a house on Millpod Drive.
And then finally, on December 27th, 2016, he creates his own official DeviantArt account.
We are witnessing a direct, undeniable correlation between physical world trauma and digital world expansion.
As his real world becomes increasingly chaotic and painful, the moves, the shifting father figures, the daily bullying, his digital footprint expands rapidly and deliberately.
He is using these platforms to construct a new identity. DeviantArt and YouTube are no longer just places to browse. They become his protective armor.
You mentioned Markiplier. It's interesting that he specifically notes subscribing to a Let's Play gamer.
Well, for a child experiencing isolation and bullying, a figure like Markiplier offers a parasocial relationship.
Right, because the YouTuber is talking directly to the camera.
Exactly, creating a sense of inclusion, consistency, and predictable companionship that is severely lacking in the middle school cafeteria.
It is a simulated friendship that feels incredibly real to an isolated adolescent.
Dominic is actively curating a digital environment where the figures are reliable and the bullies cannot reach him. He is building a digital fortress.
For anyone listening who ever felt like an outcast, finding solace online is deeply relatable. The internet has always been the ultimate refuge for kids who don't fit into the physical coordinates they were born into.
Oh, absolutely.
But I want to zero in on the DeviantArt account. The timeline notes he began browsing DeviantArt in 2009 when he was 5.
Right.
He spent 7 years as a silent observer. He absorbed the culture for 7 years, but it isn't until December 2016, at age 12, that he finally creates his own account.
Yeah.
What causes that shift? If he had been browsing DeviantArt since age 5, what psychological shift happens at age 12 to make him finally create his own account and YouTube channel? Is it a shift from being a passive observer to demanding to be seen?
I think that's exactly it. It is a critical developmental leap. When you are 5, browsing the internet is an act of passive consumption.
You are wandering through the gallery, amazed by what others have built.
But when you are 12, enduring daily bullying, feeling invisible or targeted in your physical life, creating your own account is an assertion of existence.
It is planting a flag.
By creating the YouTube channel, setting up the email, and officially joining DeviantArt, he is crossing the threshold from observer to participant.
He is saying, I have a voice. I have art to share.
If my physical peers reject me, I will demand to be acknowledged by a global community of my choosing. The bullying stripped away his physical agency, so he reclaimed it by cementing his digital identity.
He takes the yellow footprints he made at 0 years old and finally digitizes them for the world to see.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
But, a digital fortress, no matter how well constructed, cannot always protect the physical body or the mind trapped inside it.
No, it can't.
This digital expansion couldn't fully insulate him from the compounding, real-world mental health struggles. And this brings us to a deeply intense chapter in his life, spanning 2017 to 2019.
This is where the pressure cooker reaches a critical state.
In early 2017, at age 13, Dominic is admitted to Meadowood Behavioral Health Hospital as an inpatient for a couple of weeks.
And shortly after, in March, he returns to clinical care, this time as an outpatient at the Rockford Center, due to what the timeline vaguely terms a misunderstanding.
We don't have the specifics of the misunderstanding, but the context is clear. A 13-year-old requiring inpatient behavioral health treatment is a child in acute distress.
Yet, life continues amidst this clinical chaos. He mentions that around April 2017, his first and only actual relationship begins, which will continue on and off for 3 years.
He also starts reading the Warrior Cats book series with his Nana, which suggests a continuing need for expansive, lore-heavy fictional worlds.
But then, early 2018 arrives. He is 14 years old, and the timeline delivers a detail that changes everything.
Quote, lost use of cell phone. Without cell phone for next 4 years.
We have to pause and deeply consider the implications of this.
Yeah, because we just spent time analyzing how his cell phone, his Google account, his DeviantArt, how these elements formed his primary coping mechanism.
They were his armor against middle school. They were his chosen community. To take a smartphone away from a 14-year-old in 2018 for 4 years is not just a standard parental grounding.
It is severing a critical lifeline.
This raises an important question, right? Because for a teenager in 2018, a phone isn't a toy. It is their entire social cortex.
It's how they interface with their peers. Taking it away for 4 years feels like digital solitary confinement.
The developmental impact of digital isolation during the ages of 14 to 18 is profound. This is the exact window when adolescents are supposed to be differentiating from their parents and building peer networks.
Without a phone, Dominic is cut off from the parasocial support of YouTube, the creative validation of DeviantArt,
and the daily micro-interactions that teenagers use to maintain friendships. And we must look at the causality here. He loses the phone in early 2018.
And by early 2019, at age 15, he experiences 2 more inpatient stays at the Rockford Center, one in March and one in May.
You can draw a straight line between the loss of his digital coping mechanism and the escalation of his mental health crises.
When you remove a vulnerable teenager's primary tool for emotional regulation, you leave them entirely exposed to the raw nerve of their trauma.
His digital identity was his pressure valve. Without it, the pressure had nowhere to go but inward, culminating in multiple hospitalizations.
He was effectively silenced and isolated in a physical world he had already deemed unsafe.
But the human spirit's capacity to find a loophole is incredible. Dominic did not just accept the silence.
No, he didn't. The timeline notes that even without a personal device, he found a way to use computers and the internet outside of the home.
This marks the beginning of what he officially titles the library era.
He defines this period by his consistent trips to the Cecil County Public Library in Rising Sun, Maryland, to use public computers.
This is an extraordinary demonstration of resilience and drive. Many adolescents, faced with the loss of their primary device, might retreat into total despondency.
Dominic treats his digital survival as a physical quest.
We have to consider the sociological role of the public library here. It is one of the last remaining third spaces in American society.
A place where you can exist for free without the expectation of spending money and access the internet.
Think about the physical effort required. He has to travel to the library. He has to wait for an available public terminal.
He has to log in with a time limit, surrounded by strangers, knowing that his session could end at any moment.
To maintain your online presence, your art, and your community ties in a completely public physical space shows a profound dedication. He refused to let his digital identity die.
I kind of look at the public library in this era as his embassy.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, like if his home life and his school life are countries engulfed in chaos, the Cecil County Public Library was sovereign territory. It operated under different rules.
The embassy is an excellent way to conceptualize it.
When he walked through those doors and logged onto that public computer, he was granted safe passage back to his digital self. He found a loophole in his restrictions.
It was neutral ground. And interestingly, during the same library era, in August 2018, he starts high school.
And the timeline notes a major shift regarding his social experience. Bullying stops. Largely ignored by other students for the remainder of school.
On the surface, the bullying stopping sounds like a victory.
But I have to push back a little and wonder about the reality of being largely ignored for 4 years of high school. In middle school, he was actively tormented, which is awful. But is there a different, quieter kind of pain in being entirely invisible?
Well, sure.
Or was being largely ignored in high school actually a relief compared to middle school bullying, allowing him the invisible space to focus entirely on survival and art?
For a nervous system that has been subjected to active, targeted aggression, invisibility is absolutely a relief.
Just flying under the radar.
Right, because being ignored means you are no longer prey. It means Dominic no longer had to spend his cognitive energy scanning the hallway for threats, anticipating the next attack.
Is it lonely? Undoubtedly.
But it is a safe loneliness. The baseline of peace he found in being ignored at school allowed him to conserve his limited emotional bandwidth.
He needed every ounce of that energy for his real life, navigating his inner world, generating his art, and making his pilgrimages to the library embassy.
He found an equilibrium. It was fragile, built on public computer time limits and high school anonymity, but it was functional.
But just as he establishes this fragile equilibrium, finding a way to balance the lack of a phone with his library routine, the entire world fundamentally breaks.
Which brings us to the years 2020 and 2021.
This is the moment where Dominic's personal timeline collides catastrophically with global history.
Early 2020, age 16. The timeline explicitly names this the end of the world era.
He characterizes it as a continuous downward spiral of quality of life. And it aligns perfectly with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic.
For everyone listening, the pandemic was an isolation event. But look at the specific architecture of Dominic's life.
Right. The public library was his embassy. It was his sole access point to the internet, to deviant art, to his identity.
When COVID-19 hit, public libraries were among the first places to shut their doors.
The physical world locked down, trapping him inside the very house where he had no phone, no digital access, and where his trauma was rooted.
It is a devastating double isolation. He was already socially isolated at high school by being ignored.
He was isolated from his family dynamics by retreating inward.
His only tether to the outside world was the library. The pandemic didn't just force him to stay home, it severed his digital umbilical cord completely.
He was trapped in a physical reality with zero means of digital escape.
And the timeline shows the isolation compounding. In November 2020, his 3-year on-and-off relationship officially ends.
The few interpersonal tethers he had are systematically cut. But yet again, watch how his mind adapts to the restriction.
This is a fascinating pivot.
Denied his digital outlet and his community, he pivots his creativity. In May 2020, the timeline notes a major artistic shift. He begins drawing portraits.
The psychology behind this shift is deeply revealing.
How so?
When an artist who usually creates expansive, imaginative concepts is suddenly starved of human connection, the world is in lockdown, his relationship is ending, his digital community is inaccessible, they turn to the human face.
Right, because portraits are an incredibly focused, intimate, human-centric art form.
By drawing portraits, Dominic is literally rendering the humanity he is isolated from. It is an attempt to populate his empty environment with faces he can observe, control, and understand.
And he doesn't just seek connection through art, he seeks it physically. The timeline notes that around 2020 or 2021, he begins attending church again for the first time in 11 or 12 years.
If we think back to our earlier discussion, when he was 5, he left the church and found the internet.
Now, at 16 or 17, the internet has been forcefully taken away from him. So, he returns to the physical church.
It beautifully illustrates his relentless drive to find structure and community. When the digital sanctuary is revoked by global lockdowns and a lack of devices, he seeks out an offline, spiritual community.
He's looking for a higher power, a set of moral guidelines, a place to belong that does not require a Wi-Fi connection or a screen.
It demonstrates a deep yearning for a world that makes sense. Whether that world is coded in HTML or written in scripture, the underlying need is identical. He is searching for an anchor in a chaotic sea.
That desperation to find a connection, to find any kind of loophole in his isolation, culminates in August 2021. Dominic is 17.
The timeline states that the library era officially ends because, and I just marvel at the resourcefulness here, he begins sneaking a school Chromebook home.
He notes that he uses it at leisure, though it only allowed a highly limited amount of YouTube and DeviantArt access because the device was strictly controlled by the school's network filters.
I want to focus on the phrase sneaking a school Chromebook home.
He is risking disciplinary action from his school just to get a heavily restricted, filtered drip feed of his digital life.
It highlights the absolute necessity of the internet for his psychological survival. It was never a luxury or a mere pastime.
He was willing to break the rules, to risk punishment, just to access a fraction of his community.
He had spent years surviving on the margins, walking to the library, and during the lockdown. Sneaking the Chromebook was an act of self-preservation. It was a teenager gasping for digital air.
But this era ends on a remarkably heavy note. The final entry for 2021, the year he turns 18, is simply, "End of nostalgic memories."
It is such a definitive, melancholic statement.
It really is. Why does he classify late 2021 as the end of nostalgic memories? Is this the exact moment childhood officially dies for him, killed by the pandemic and isolation?
I think so. Nostalgia requires a sense of safety when looking backward. It implies a fondness for a time that felt secure, like his memory of the Elk Mills house in 2013.
But the cumulative weight of the years, from 2014 to 2021, the loss of the phone, the hospitalizations, the brutal isolation of the pandemic, it crushed the romanticism of his youth.
When you turn 18 after surviving a gauntlet like that, you realize you can no longer afford the luxury of nostalgia.
The coping mechanisms of childhood are retired.
A much more serious, stark, adult reality sets in. The safety he seeks cannot be found by looking back. He understands he has to build it himself in the future.
And building that future is exactly what happens next. This brings us to the final segment of our deep dive today, covering 2022 to the present day in 2026.
This is where all the pressures we've discussed, the yearning for a controlled environment, the shifting spiritual faith, the relentless artistic dedication, finally synthesize.
Synthesized into the creation of the very things you, our listeners, already associate with Dominic.
2022 is the year the dam finally breaks. He turns 18. The timeline notes he reaches the peak of artistic skill.
He acquires a state ID, a crucial marker of physical independence. He graduates high school in June.
He even notes a physical change weight gain because restrictions on being able to eat snack foods were lifted.
This is a subtle but powerful callback to the eating disorder and control issues that began at age 3. He finally possesses autonomy over his own body and his diet.
But the true catalyst, the spark that ignites the explosive growth of the next 4 years, occurs in June 2022.
He receives his first laptop.
He notes that for the first time in years, he is able to access all of the internet and all of social media.
And then in December 2022, he receives a cell phone for the first time in 4 years.
The 4-year digital drought is officially over.
He's plugged fully back into the matrix.
And look at the velocity of his progress when full digital access is restored to a mind that has been starved of it during critical developmental years.
It acts as a massive accelerator.
The accumulated creativity, previously squeezed through the tiny bottleneck of a filtered school Chromebook, floods outward. By mid-2023, he reaches 1,000 watchers on DeviantArt.
For those who might not know the mechanics of DeviantArt, what does hitting 1,000 watchers signify?
On platforms like DeviantArt, a watcher is someone who actively opts into your feed because they value your specific artistic outburn.
Okay, so hitting 1,000 is a major milestone.
It means you are no longer just participating in the community, you are a recognized figure within it. You have an audience.
For Dominic, who began browsing that site at age 5 as a silent observer, and who spent high school being largely ignored, having 1,000 people actively waiting to see what his mind produces is immense validation.
But the digital world isn't the only place he is seeking connection and structure. In January 2023, he is baptized at Porter's Grove Baptist Church.
Baptism is a profound public declaration.
It is the ritualistic washing away of the old self and the adoption of a new identity within a spiritual community. He is actively seeking a spiritual father, an ultimate authority and structure that he can trust.
And if we look at the timeline of fathers and creators in his life from this point forward, an incredible psychological sequence emerges.
In early 2023, he seeks a spiritual creator through baptism.
And then, in November 2023, and listener, this is the moment you've been waiting for, he becomes a creator himself. He launches Verse World, his massive science fiction world-building project.
You've heard us dissect Verse World before on this show, but look at the context we have now.
Verse World isn't just a fun sci-fi hobby project. It is the ultimate evolution of his coping mechanisms.
Verse World is the ultimate Elk Mills house.
Exactly. It is a universe he built entirely from scratch, where he is the architect. He dictates the physics, the lore, the borders.
Nobody can take away his phone in Verse World. Nobody can restrict his snacks or bully him or force him to move to a new apartment in Verse World.
He is the god of that universe.
He spent his entire childhood trying to find a safe container in a chaotic physical world. When that proved impossible, he used his peak artistic skill and his newly restored digital access to simply build a universe to serve as one.
The psychological sequencing is breathtaking. January 2023, he seeks a spiritual creator. November 2023, he becomes a creator of his own universe.
And then, literally the very next month, December 18th, 2023, he has his first ever meeting with his biological father in Rock Hall, Maryland.
It is as if he had to become the creator of his own universe before he felt psychologically fortified enough to confront the creator of his physical self.
He does not approach his biological father as the broken, isolated child of the library era. He approaches him as an 18-year-old artist, an adult with a state ID, and the architect of his own reality.
He meets him on equal footing.
But as this timeline constantly reminds us, reality rarely conforms to a neat cinematic narrative.
In 2024, Dominic continues checking the boxes of conventional adult independence. He gets his first job as a janitor. He gets his first debit card.
But the document ends with brutal, immediate, present-day reality. Just a few months ago in 2026.
On April 15th, 2026, at age 22, he completely severs contact with his biological father. The reunion lasted less than 2.5 years.
And then just weeks later, on May 4th, 2026, he is fired from his first job.
It is a staggering 1-2 punch to end the timeline on. He loses the biological anchor he just found, and he loses the financial independence he just achieved, almost simultaneously.
Looking at the totality of this life, the eating disorder at 3, the clinical interventions, the loss of the phone, the hospitalizations, how should we interpret the events of 2026?
Right. Does severing ties with his dad and losing his job in 2026 signal another end-of-the-world era? Or is this the first time he's exerting total adult agency?
Is cutting off his dad an act of self-destruction or an act of self-preservation?
Given the arc we've traced today, I view the events of 2026 as a massive assertion of power and agency.
I agree completely.
When he was 3, he couldn't control his environment, so he controlled his food. When he was 13, he couldn't control the bullies, so he hid in a digital fortress.
But at 22, he has a laptop. He has the 1,000 watchers. He has an entire universe he built himself.
He no longer needs to passively endure a toxic or unfulfilling situation because he lacks options. Severing contact with his father was almost certainly a conscious choice to protect the psychological peace he fought for 22 years to build.
And getting fired, while stressful, is a normal, navigable adult setback. He is no longer a victim being tossed around by his timeline. He has become the author of it.
That reframing changes everything about how we view his current situation. And it brings us to the end of our deep dives today.
What a journey.
What we've seen by mapping out this life chronologically is that our biggest creative outputs, masterpieces like Verse World, are rarely random strokes of genius.
They're forged in the fires of our specific restrictions and our specific freedoms.
Our trauma creates the boundaries, and our creativity finds the loopholes. I want to ask you, the listener, to take a moment and consider your own life timeline.
If you were to plot out your moves, your heartbreaks, the times you felt most isolated or misunderstood,
What coping mechanisms did you build in the dark? And more importantly, Which of those childhood survival mechanisms evolved into your greatest adult strengths?
Dominic's early trauma and a pair of yellow footprints turned into an entire galaxy. What did yours turn into?
As we close the book on Dominic's timeline, I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought based on the text.
The document ends abruptly on May 4th, 2026, with Dominic getting fired from his job right after cutting ties with his father.
On paper, it looks like a moment of profound loss and uncertainty.
But think about his track record. Consider that at age 14, he survived the complete loss of his digital identity by walking to a public library just to exist.
Consider that at age 17, he survived the isolation of a global pandemic by sneaking a Chromebook and drawing the human faces he desperately missed.
Every time Dominic's world has collapsed, he hasn't just survived the rubble, he has used it to build something exponentially more complex in its place.
So, knowing what we know now, standing here in the wake of his 2026 fallout, what incredible, unprecedented new world is Dominic likely building right now?